let's say your parent is the emotional type.
Okay.
You might expect them to overreact or become easily overwhelmed in stressful situations.
That's a great point.
Right?
So let's dive into these 4 types, starting with the emotional parent.
Okay.
This is your classic drama queen or king.
Oh, right. Imagine a parent who thrives.
Welcome to Witter. Who Has Time to Read? The podcast that brings deep dives for busy minds. Listen to AI hosts Jane and Dane and get ready to unpack the world's most captivating books in just a fraction of the time. Whether commuting, working out, or just squeezing in a quick break, we deliver key insights, thought-provoking themes, and takeaways you can carry into your day. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Plus, use our links in the description to purchase this book. Your support helps us bring more engaging book discussions to you. Listen and follow us wherever you get your podcasts. Who has time to read? You do, with Witter.
Okay, you sent us this book, Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents.
Yeah.
And I gotta say, the title kind of sounds heavy, doesn't it?
It does.
But this deep dive,
Yeah.
I think this is going to be more enlightening than anything else, really. We're going to talk about some relationship patterns, ones we see all the time. You might even recognize some of these in your own life, right?
Yeah.
Ever feel like really lonely?
Yeah.
Even when you're surrounded by family?
Oh, yeah.
Well, this book might explain why.
It might. It's fascinating, isn't it? The book is written by Lindsay C. Gibson.
Okay.
She's a clinical psychologist.
Okay.
And she's devoted her career to this very topic.
Wow.
And she's got, some serious street cred, I guess you could say. Even big names in psychology are praising her work and her insights.
That's great. So let's jump right in. What exactly is emotional immaturity in parents?
Well, the book dives right into this tricky situation, where a child is actually more emotionally mature than their parent. The effects of that can be pretty significant, impacting the child's development and relationships later in life.
And the book starts with some really powerful examples of emotional loneliness.
Oh.
There's this guy, David, who talks about feeling totally alone, even when he's with family. He describes it as floating in the ocean with no one around.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's powerful. And then there's 7-year-old Rhonda, who remembers feeling totally isolated, even when she was physically standing with her family during a move. The book's point is that emotionally immature parents just aren't able to give their kids the emotional responsiveness that they need.
Yeah.
So even if you have, your basic needs met, like food and shelter, there's this emptiness, this void where emotional connection should be.
Yeah, and get this. The book says that loneliness can follow us into adulthood.
Oh, yeah.
It can influence who we choose as partners, as friends, and it can even shape those relationships.
It's like we're unconsciously recreating those patterns from childhood.
Okay, so let's get down to the nitty-gritty here. The book gives us some pretty specific signs of emotional immaturity in parents. And I'm really curious to get your take on these as we go through them.
For sure. And remember, we're talking about patterns here.
Right.
Not just isolated incidents.
Of course.
We all have bad days, right?
Yeah.
It's about how someone consistently behaves and interacts over time.
Totally. So the first sign is overreacting to small things.
Yeah.
Like blowing something minor way out of proportion, creating unnecessary drama. Does that sound familiar?
Absolutely. The book gives examples of parents making mountains out of molehills, letting these little things escalate into these huge conflicts.
Right. Like they can't regulate their own emotions.
Right.
So then everything feels like a crisis.
Yeah.
And the second sign on the list is a lack of empathy and emotional awareness.
Yeah, this one's a major red flag. Emotionally immature parents really struggle to understand or even acknowledge their children's feelings. It's almost like they're on completely different wavelengths.
Totally.
A healthy parent would take the time to listen, validate, and offer comfort.
Right. And the book talks about how this can actually lead kids to believe that their feelings are wrong.
Right.
Or unimportant, which can have a really long-lasting impact on their self-esteem and their ability to form healthy relationships as adults. Okay, what's the next sign?
Discomfort with genuine feelings. So they might try to shut down conversations about emotions, change the subject, or even get angry when someone tries to express something deeply personal.
Oh, wow. It's like feelings are the enemy.
Yeah.
Right. Like they're afraid of vulnerability or something.
It seems that way.
And then we have self-preoccupation.
Yes. Emotionally immature parents tend to be very focused on their own needs and their own experiences, often at the expense of others.
Yeah.
They might dominate conversations, always bringing it back to themselves, or be completely unaware of how their actions affect those around them.
Okay. And the final sign on this list is inconsistency and contradictory behavior.
Ooh, this one can be particularly confusing for children.
Right.
One minute the parent's loving and the next they're distant.
Right.
Or critical. There's no predictable emotional foundation, so the child never knows what to expect. It's like walking on eggshells all the time.
You know, reading through this list, it really hit me how damaging these seemingly small interactions can be.
Yeah.
Over time, right? It's not just one big blow up. It's that constant like drip, drip, drip of emotional neglect.
Right.
That wears away at a child's sense of self.
Exactly. It's the cumulative effect of these patterns that can have a profound impact on a child's development.
Right.
And their relationships in adulthood.
And here's where it gets fascinating.
Yeah.
The book takes all this a step further.
Okay.
And breaks down emotionally immature parents into 4 distinct types.
Wow.
I think figuring out which type describes your parent can be super helpful.
Oh, for sure.
In understanding your own experiences.
Right, because knowing the type helps you anticipate certain reactions or predict how interactions might play out.
That's a great point.
Like, let's say your parent is the emotional type.
Okay.
You might expect them to overreact or become easily overwhelmed in stressful situations.
That's a great point.
Right?
So let's dive into these 4 types, starting with the emotional parent.
Okay.
This is your classic drama queen or king.
Oh, right. Imagine a parent who thrives on attention and validation.
Okay.
They're constantly seeking reassurance and creating chaos to get it.
Wow.
It's like they're always performing for an audience. They're craving that spotlight.
That sounds exhausting.
Right.
Okay, tell me about the driven parent.
Okay, this is your classic control freak.
Uh-huh.
They're micromanaging every detail, imposing their vision of how things should be on everyone around them.
Okay.
So let's say they're planning a family vacation.
Okay.
They'll likely dictate every aspect of the trip, from the destination to the itinerary, without considering anyone else's preferences. A healthy parent would allow for some flexibility and collaboration in the planning process.
Right. They've got to be in charge, calling the shots.
Always. Yes.
Got it. Now let's move on to the rejecting parent.
Okay. This type is emotionally distant, wanting to be left alone as much as possible. They might be withdrawn, minimally engaged in their child's life, even expressing annoyance at having to parent at all. Imagine a child trying to share their excitement about a school project.
Okay.
The rejecting parent might just dismiss it.
Right.
Or tell them to go away.
That's got to be hurtful. Okay, so the final type is the passive parent.
This parent goes with the flow, avoiding conflict at all costs, even when it's harmful. They might appear easygoing on the surface, but their lack of intervention can have serious consequences, especially when it comes to protecting their kids.
Right.
So, for instance, if one sibling is bullying another, the passive parent might simply ignore it or tell them to, work it out themselves.
Oh, wow. So we've got our 4 types then. Emotional, driven, rejecting, and passive. I bet a lot of people are having some aha moments right now.
Yeah.
Recognizing their own parents in these descriptions.
Yeah, for sure. It's all about making the unconscious conscious, right? Putting a name to these patterns is a huge step in understanding why certain interactions always seem to follow the same script. So now that we've got these 4 types of emotionally immature parents, let's think about how these dynamics can impact you as an adult child.
Right. Because it's not just about feeling lonely in childhood. These patterns, they can have a really long-lasting effect on our relationships and how we view ourselves. In fact, there's this story in the book about a father who buys a convertible right after leaving his depressed wife, completely oblivious to his daughter's pain.
Oh, wow.
It's a pretty powerful example of how a parent's emotional immaturity can really blind them to their child's needs.
Yeah. It highlights how self-preoccupation can just overshadow empathy, even in those moments of significant distress for the child.
Right.
The daughter's needs were just completely disregarded.
And the book makes it clear that the impact, it goes way beyond just feeling sad, right? It can affect how we relate to everyone in our lives.
Yeah.
Not just our parents.
Absolutely. You might find it difficult to trust your own feelings.
Right.
Accepting bad relationships as normal or feeling guilty for wanting more from your relationships.
It's like these patterns, they become the blueprint for how we connect with others.
Yeah.
Right. It's like we're drawn to what feels familiar, even if it's not healthy for us.
Right.
But here's a reassuring message. It's not about being damaged.
Right.
Right. It's about understanding how these patterns develop and then starting to do things differently.
Right. Once we become aware of these patterns, we can start to change them. And the book offers this really helpful framework for understanding our own reactions in relationships, the concept of internalizers versus externalizers.
Okay, this is where things got super relatable for me.
Yeah.
The book explains how kids cope with emotionally immature parents.
Right.
And there's these two main paths.
So you have the externalizers.
Okay.
Who tend to blame outward, seeking these external fixes for their problems.
Right.
They might be quick to anger, volatile, even create chaos around them.
The book gives some pretty wild examples of externalizers, particularly like within sibling dynamics. Like there's this one, a brother who would resort to like physical aggression whenever he didn't get his way.
Wow. And then you have the internalizers,
right,
who turn inward, blaming themselves for everything that goes wrong.
Right.
They often become people pleasers, overly responsible, always trying to keep the peace.
Oh my gosh, that's totally me. A classic internalizer.
Yeah.
I'm always trying to like fix everyone else's problems, putting my own needs last, and it can be so draining.
It can be. Yeah. And the book points out that internalizers, they're at high risk for burnout and emotional exhaustion.
Yeah.
It's that constant giving without receiving much in return.
So if you're listening and thinking, why do I always end up in these one-sided relationships?
Yeah.
Why am I always the one fixing things? Why do I struggle with boundaries? Well, this might be why.
It could be, yeah.
You know, it's not about being weak or a pushover.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing these patterns, these really deeply ingrained patterns from childhood that can shape our adult interactions.
It's true.
Okay, so we've done a lot of analysis, but what about solutions? I know what you're thinking. Great, so my parents are emotionally immature, now what? But here's the good news. The book doesn't leave you hanging. It offers some really solid advice on how to break free from these patterns and start building healthier relationships.
I like that.
And it's important to remember this isn't about fixing your parents.
Right.
It's about taking care of yourself.
Yes. It's about recognizing their limitations.
Yeah.
Accepting that they might not change. And figuring out how to interact in a way that protects your own well-being.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we can't control how other people behave.
Right.
But we can control how we respond.
I like that.
Okay, I love that. So what are some of those practical strategies? The first one that really stood out to me was detached observation.
Okay.
You know, can you tell me more about that?
So imagine taking a step back from the emotional intensity of the situation.
Okay.
And observing your parent almost as if you're watching a nature documentary.
Interesting. So less reactivity, more curiosity.
Exactly. Instead of getting caught up in the drama, you're simply observing their behavior, noticing patterns, and trying to understand their motivations without judgment.
The book uses this great analogy of being a scientist studying an interesting but unpredictable species.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
It's about detaching from the need to change them or get them to see things your way.
Yeah.
You're simply gathering information.
Okay, and then there's maturity awareness.
Yes.
Which builds on that idea of detached observation. Right, so this is where you adjust your expectations based on your parents' actual emotional capacity. You're not expecting them to suddenly become insightful or responsive.
Right.
You're meeting them where they are.
So it's about setting realistic goals for interactions.
Exactly.
For example, maybe your goal for a certain conversation isn't to get your mom to apologize for something hurtful she said in the past.
Right. Your goal might be to simply express your own feelings calmly and clearly without expecting her to validate or understand them.
It's about shifting your focus, I think, from the relationship to the outcome.
Is this?
Yes.
Because sometimes the most mature thing we can do is accept that certain relationships have limitations.
Okay. And the last strategy that really resonated with me was stepping out of the role.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Right.
So this is where you start to challenge those familiar roles that you might have played
Right.
in your family growing up.
Like the good child, the fixer, the peacemaker, even, like the invisible one.
Exactly. Whatever role you kind of took on
Right.
to survive in that emotionally immature family system.
Exactly. And it's about giving yourself permission to be your own person.
Yes.
With your own needs and desires. And recognizing that you're not responsible for your parents' happiness or emotional well-being.
It's a big one.
So it's about setting boundaries, saying no, and prioritizing self-care.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that you have a right to a life that feels good to you.
Right.
Even if that means disappointing your parents.
Which, let's be honest, can be really difficult for us internalizers.
Yeah.
Who are so used to putting everyone else first.
It's true. It's definitely a process, and it takes practice. But the book's packed with these real-world examples and exercises that can help you start making those changes.
Yeah, it's like learning a new language.
Right.
The language of self-respect, self-care, and healthy boundaries.
Exactly. It might feel awkward at first, but the more you use it, the more fluent you'll become.
And the payoff is huge, because when you break free from those old patterns, you start to attract a different kind of person into your life.
Yeah, you're able to connect with people who are emotionally available, who are empathetic, responsive.
Yeah.
People who don't drain you or make you feel like you have to perform to be loved.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
And one of the things that surprised me about this book was that it doesn't just focus on the negative.
Yeah, it's true.
It actually highlights the strengths that can come from growing up with emotionally immature parents.
It's interesting, isn't it? These strengths are often born out of necessity.
Yeah.
These individuals have learned to navigate some really complex emotional situations without much guidance.
Exactly. They become resourceful.
Yeah.
Self-reliant, and often develop a deep capacity for empathy, I think.
They've had to be attuned to the needs of others, right?
Wow.
Often at the expense of their own. It's a survival mechanism.
And the book really emphasizes the importance of recognizing and celebrating these strengths. It's like saying, okay, you were dealt a difficult hand, but look at what you've accomplished despite that.
Right. It's about reclaiming your narrative, shifting from a victim identity to one of empowerment and resilience.
So let's say you've done the work, right? You've read the book, you understand the patterns, you're practicing detached observation, you're setting boundaries, you're stepping out of your old roles. How do you know if it's actually working?
Well, the book describes this shift in how you experience relationships.
Okay.
You start to gravitate toward people who are emotionally mature, who can meet you on an equal footing.
Right.
And you won't be drawn to the drama or the chaos that might have felt familiar from childhood.
You'll start to see those red flags, those signs of emotional immaturity, and you're less likely to get swept up in them.
Exactly. You'll become more discerning, more selective about who you let into your inner circle.
And the connections you do make with emotionally mature people, they'll feel different.
There will be. There's a sense of safety, mutual respect, and genuine intimacy that might have been missing in previous relationships.
It's like finally feeling seen, heard, and understood in a way that feels supportive and empowering,
Yeah. And remember, it's not about perfection, right?
Right.
It's about progress. It's about moving toward relationships that feel good to you, even if it means letting go of those old familiar patterns.
One of those powerful takeaways from this book, I think, is that we can have fulfilling lives, loving relationships, even if our parents weren't able to provide that for us.
It's true. It's about rewriting the script, creating a new ending to your story. It's about hope, healing, and the power of self-awareness.
And this book is packed with so many valuable insights. As we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a thought-provoking question from the book to reflect on.
The book mentions that even without understanding, your parents can still love you.
Yeah.
How does that make you feel? What does that mean to you?
This deep dive is just the beginning. We encourage you to explore the book further. It might just change your life.